All right, I think that's it. We're live in action. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our People Advisory webinar series. For those of you who are loyal participants, you might see different faces on your screen. Do not worry, Janine, Marianne, Callie are not too far away, and they will come back to talk to you about HR strategy and leadership. But today I am here with Vanessa Vaillant and Alexis Walker. Here are our faces. If I click correctly, there you go. First thing, got it right. So Vanessa and Alexis are both senior managers in consulting at BDO. And today we'll talk to you a little bit about organizational transformations and more specifically, why a change manager is a project manager's best ally. I'll introduce our two guests a little bit so that we know who we're speaking with today. They're both smart, they're both well-versed, which will make them very interesting to listen to. And what I love about both of them is that while they are quite experienced, they're very open to finding new ways to do things. And I think when we work on transformation, it's really important to be open to innovation and not following the path that we've always followed, but doing things really differently. So Vanessa has extensive experience with transformations. She's been through one herself through a merger and acquisition process a few years back. She's worked with clients both in public and private sectors in change management capacities, as well as a business analyst and a project manager. So she's got a little bit of both positions here today. She is an influencing professional and she helps leaders come together around decision-making process through transformation journeys. Vanessa has worked with BDO Canada for nearly a decade and has now been with BDO Australia for 2 years. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks, Annie. That's such a lovely introduction.
Yes, and you'll hear maybe in both our accents that we're both from Canada, so that's a fun fact that you can get under your belt this morning. Alexis Walker is a senior manager as well at BDO and works in consulting. She's delivered infrastructure projects around multiple cities in Australia. She's worked on engineering projects and she's led great changes in Australia, like new roads in Australia, building new schools, hospitals, and a lot more. She is no stranger to projects where you've got multiple stakeholders and you need to get everyone to agree around a table. She understands all too well the complexity of transformation. And one of Alexis's strengths that I see comes through very easily through the screen is that she is good at making sense out of ideas and bringing them to life. So she'll help organizations build the right business case and bring clarity around what are the outcomes that we should work towards, and then keep people accountable to them. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I feel like the standard has been set very high.
My pleasure. I only say the things that I think I don't like to lie, especially not when I'm being recorded. All right, before we kick things off, I'll try to walk us through a little bit of a housekeeping rules. All right, so we have that slide on the screen that should tell you where everything is a little bit. So to start, I think I need to click now. Yes. You're all automatically muted, but we'd love to hear your questions. So you can either unmute yourself or you can use that little question mark on the side of your screen to ask a question throughout the session. If your questions are not answered, we'd love to answer them after the webinar. So please either reach out to us, or if we've received your question, we will get back to you certainly with an answer and maybe more of a conversation around the question that you had. The slides that we're using today, you can download them in the Access handout, a little icon here. So don't take notes, and you'll see there's not much content. We just wanted to talk to visual content on the screen. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, there is an Access support button here. So please click here and we will try to get you the help that you need. And finally, this session is being recorded, and everyone who's registered to the session will receive a follow-up email with the slides, a link to the recording, and access to register to future sessions, because this is a monthly event that we do in the People Advisory team. You'll also have all of our contact information if you want to get in touch with any of us. All right, that was the fun part. Now, we're here to talk today about how a change manager and a project manager work well together. But before we really tackle that, I thought it'd be good for us to understand what is project management and what is change management, and who else better than our experts to give us a little bit of that overview. So Alexis, if you could help us by giving us a little bit of a high-level view of the project management practice, please.
Wonderful, thank you. So by no means is this a textbook definition, but if I start with a project is generally a temporary or a shorter term endeavour where you're creating a unique product, service or result. The project should be clearly defined, scoped. It will have a decided start and end point, and it'll also have a budget associated with it. The project team members may be brought together for this project, so they may or may not have worked together in the past. And then project management of said project is bringing the knowledge, tools, frameworks to deliver on those project requirements on time and on budget, ideally.
Ideally, in an ideal world, but
Absolutely.
We all have different stories about that. Vanessa, what is change management all about? Can you give us a high-level view of what it is in your words?
Happy to, Annie. I love change management for so many reasons, so I'm excited about this webinar. I guess from my perspective, change management in its very simplest form is about the people that need to come along the journey, and really it's their ability to shift their mindset and their behaviors to operate in whatever the change the project is driving. And it's a tricky one, and I think we've all experienced change that has flopped, and oftentimes it's not successful, or it may not have lasted over the long term because there's a big people component that was missed, or that didn't get the attention or the effort that was required. And that ultimately has a cost to the organization, whether that be financial, whether that be retention of valued employees, which is a key risk that we've seen, or even productivity dips and impacts on customer satisfaction. So the impacts can show up in so many different ways. And I guess that's why I'm so excited about this webinar, because the ability for the change managers like Alexis and I to work closely with the project managers, there's so much value that can be gained from that, and it's often overlooked at how valuable that relationship is. And just so I'm clear and get this on the record, sometimes change management has a reputation for being about group hugs and kumbayas, and really, as much as I love a good group hug, that's not what it's about. It's really about there is a process that you follow, and there are tools and techniques for engaging the people in the right way, for getting the sponsors aligned, for managing resistance that you need to apply to do this successfully. And a lot of change management happens behind the scenes, so you may not even know it's supporting a project, but is absolutely critical to the outcome of that project. That's what I say change management is, Annie.
Thanks, guys. And I love the technical and theoretical definitions around this. But what I'd love to know more is, why do you do it? So definition is great. Dictionary definitions are overestimated. But yeah, overrated. Vanessa, why do you do change management? What is it that you love about it?
Yeah, it's an easy one for me. I kind of navigated into this specialization having worked on big transformations and seeing that most of the time, the reason they weren't successful is the people component was lost. And this was 8 years ago, when change wasn't quite as obvious as it is today, and the value that it brings. And I love it because it's such a challenge. Everyone is absolutely different. They come from a different place, different cultures, have different contexts, have different capabilities. And that's what makes it so complex. As humans, we're also different. So getting people to change what they know and is comfortable is difficult and can create a lot of anxiety. But at the same time, it's so essential, and that's why I find it quite rewarding.
Alexis, what do you love about being a project manager?
I think Vanessa and I have very similar drivers and values. So for me, what I love about managing projects is the people component and then the outcome component. So I love walking into, albeit stressful, a complex, meaty, challenging problem or issue that you're trying to resolve, and you bring together the best people with diverse backgrounds, experiences, skill sets, ways of viewing a problem, and in turn you bring that eclectic recipe together to generate really good outcomes and deliver value. So I love that component of it, where you're working together as part of a team and you can deliver something that's tangible at the end of it.
I like that. And you know, a lot of people say like nurses or doctors, they're the ones helping people, and I'm not taking anything away from them. They really are every day of their lives. But I think in our roles, we also help people because so much of our life is about our jobs. And when we work on transformations or on projects, well, we're just trying to find ways to help make people's lives better as well. So I'm not saying that we're superheroes, but we do have people's best interests at heart, I think.
Oh, that's such a nice way of expressing that, Annie.
But I'll try to not be too, like you said, Vanessa, kumbaya around change management. Okay, we thought we'd do things a bit differently here today, and we want to do some myth busting. So we'll have some polling questions somewhere on the side of our screens. I don't know where I should be looking at on my screen to see them. Poll open, excellent. So we'd like everyone who's on the line to vote. We'll have 5 in total, so don't worry, you don't have too much work to do with us today. We'll have 5 statements, and we'd like to know your thoughts about if it's a myth or a reality. The first one being that change management slows the transformation process. So we'll give people just a little bit of time to vote. We'll just leave it up there for 30 seconds to a minute. The first myth or the first statement that we put out there is also because we've heard, all of us, I think the 3 of us on the line here, and probably many of the people listening, we've heard so many times, we don't have time for this. Many leaders consider that we don't have time for change management activities. Sometimes it's even perceived that you can just tell people to do something and they'll actually do it, and that the change will be embedded. Maybe that's the case with children or in certain situations, but we think that, or I think we need to take the time with people to really manage the change, even if it can be perceived as something that slows down the process sometimes. I think we can close down the poll now. Did it work? We have some tech experts in the background here. All right, am I supposed to see does some of you see the results on the screen?
Yep, Annie, I can walk through the results. So 94% of participants suggested this statement is a myth, and 6% suggested it's a reality. I love having this perspective going into the discussion. That's great. I think we can pull that down now, Maddie. Or perfect.
Cool. So what do you think, Vanessa? Is it a myth or a reality? And were you the 94%?
Oh, of course. I have two points of view that I'd like to share with the group. And it's interesting because I think the perception is probably that there is some truth to that statement when looking at it just a surface level. But there's probably an element, if you don't account for the people component and the effort that will require to manage and drive the change through them in the planning process, then the perception is that it slows the process and the transformation of the project down. But if it's part of that, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Alexis, then it doesn't slow the process because it's part of it, it's embedded within. But at the same time, my realistic self, in having supported big transformation in financial services and big government departments in Canada and Australia, my realistic self would say that it probably does take time to bring people along and to help them understand why we're doing this and the value that this could create and how they're being impacted, and then to help them build the capabilities to operate this new system or in this new role, because people are different and will progress through that journey at a different pace, and that's completely okay. So I think maybe I sit more on, it's a myth, but there is some reality to it that, you know, it does take time. This doesn't just happen without dedicated effort, but if you plan for it up front, it actually will accelerate the process when the point comes to go live and flip the switch, where adoption, you'll see greater levels of adoption and acceptance, and ultimately long-term sustainability of the results.
So Alexis, you in your role often have to manage timeline and budget and outcomes. What is your view about this statement here? Is it a myth or a reality in your mind?
I'm with the 94%, so I believe it's a myth in terms of change slowing down the process, but I can appreciate where people think it's a reality. So firstly, I think transformation by its very definition is about change. And so change management is crucial as part of that transformational journey. And for that, it needs to be recognised, it needs to be supported, it needs to be resourced, and it needs to be budgeted accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, projects generally have a very clearly defined time and budget parameters attached to them. And so where I have seen change management viewed in a negative light is typically because it's been thought of after the fact. And that means that the planning for it, the budgeting, the time implications haven't been allowed for. And in some of the big, meaty infrastructure projects that I've been involved with, I liken them a bit to the Titanic. Not that they're sinking, but they are a really meaty ship. And in order to change that ship, it takes a lot of effort, and it certainly doesn't happen quickly. So any impact to a project's budget or timeline because of a change management component or any other unplanned event for that matter can be viewed negatively, and you sort of get two courses of action. You either stop what you're doing and have to restart so that the change is incorporated as part of the project moving forward, or alternatively, the change management piece will be dismissed, and that's where you run the risk of your project essentially becoming a flop, because you've done everything that you can to deliver the project, but then when you hand it over, it won't be successful because of that change component.
And that just makes it more costly, and it takes more time to get the Titanic back on the water if it started to think.
And you have a huge reputational issue as well as your time and budget implications as well.
So true, Alexis. And some of my projects have felt like the Titanic, not before we sunk, obviously. But oftentimes clients will call us when the project has gone south or it's headed in that direction, and they've suddenly realized the value and the importance of and the role that people play in actually bringing this concept to life. And it can be anything. It can be a process change. It can be very simple change that is difficult for people, and it can be more enterprise level where you're talking big technology changes, big organizational restructures. You're looking at your service delivery model or outsourcing. And I think, you know, you come in at the last minute because the perception was, well, a training, a quick training session and a handout along with some communications will be sufficient. And that's just not enough anymore to support the constant state of change we're in. And ideally, the high-performing organizations are building the change management capability within the organization and the people at all different roles. So they're not necessarily change managers. They have access to that specialization and support, but there's a framework and a capability that's expected across all the roles to drive change successfully. It's a really interesting one.
That's a big point there, because I do see change as an investment for an organization and for our roles to help people become better at managing change, because and I hate those buzzword statements that everyone says, but change is the only constant. And I don't think it could be more true. Change will continue to happen. We'll not spend too much time mentioning the COVID word that nobody should repeat out loud ever again. But how big a change was that? And how did we all need to shift our ways of working to it? And I think it can be a great segue to our next statement, if I can get it on the screen. There we go. Archie Rose, when I think of transformations, and maybe we can get the polling happening at the same time, please. So myth or reality is transformation about people, process, and technology. So in change management, very often it's the baseline of what we look into. We'll look at people, we'll look at process, and we'll look at technology, and then we'll understand what the change or the transformation is all about. When I think of transformation, of course, we all have COVID examples in mind. I'm thinking of Archie Rose, for example, the different distilleries around the world who just shifted their products, shifted what they were doing to be there for the world crisis that we're going through. So instead of producing gin, they just started producing hand sanitizer, which is a product that we use a lot more than gin, hopefully, these days. But what transformed? Is it the people, the process, the technology? Is it all of it? And is it a transformation itself if it's just the product? We can maybe close the polling now, and maybe I'll ask Alexis, can you see the polling results and share them with us?
That I can indeed. So we have a poll that says 100% of participants that answered this question think that it's a reality, that transformation is all about people, process, and technology.
Do you agree with the very large majority, Alexis?
I do, which, you know, does that mean that we're all a bunch of like-minded people, or have we just had similar experiences? We'll see how that goes. So for me, it's a reality. I will liken it to a triangle. It doesn't matter whether it's an equilateral triangle, an isosceles triangle, you need the 3 points, which is the people, the process, and the technology. I don't see how you can have transformation without all three, and it's just the weighting of each of those three for me. In terms of my, again, more of that infrastructure construction experience, you will always have those three elements. Even if the project has a greater focus on, say, an asset or a technology piece, change might be possible. And if I think about the feasibility studies that I might do as part of those projects, any technology might be possible or feasible in terms of that particular scope of work. But unless you have the people change, the process that enables people to actually go through that change, and unless though the change manager in reality is on board with that journey, then you won't have the transformation. For me, we've spoken, of course, about COVID, and yes, we might, a lot of us, or the three of us that are on the call at the moment, are all working from home, and that's necessitated change. Without the technology to actually enable you to work from home, and the process of connection with your team, and how you can still perform your roles and your responsibilities, then ultimately the transformation doesn't happen. So you need all three, in my view.
Vanessa, are you on board with the 100% of the world, or are you different position on this one?
Yeah, I'm 100%. I think that's a reality. I think it's a simple way of articulating what a transformation is. I think there's lots of complexity in the detail and the dependencies and the interactions between those elements. But for me, it's one ecosystem that needs to work together, and they need to be connected, those elements, and considered in any transformation. And while, you know, it may be a technology train, like a CRM you're trying to implement, but you've got to consider the people and the processes that bring that technology change to life, and that really reinforce it. And I guess I like this statement because it reinforces why change managers like you and I, Annie, need to be closely connected with the project managers. It's really about how can we bring these different puzzle pieces together, and understand at what point they need to come together, or they need to, in the very least, be considered as one. Now, we do a lot of work in operating model design, and that's where I see really, and you know, when I say operating model design, I mean really it's kind of the blueprint, or how you're going to close the gap between the strategy that you've identified you're aiming for, and the operational reality of how that comes to life and how you can achieve that, which is tricky sometimes, truthfully. And in those instances, we often look at people, process, technology, and how they need to come together, and how those puzzle pieces fit together. And you know, we've worked with clients that have started down the path of, we want a new operating model for our HR department, for our IT department, and there have been instances where we've had to take a pause and say, okay, do we have the right culture? Do people have the right mindset to support an operating model such as this one? And we've had to pause and redirect and pivot the approach slightly to really define the culture we're trying to drive and achieve in the mindset, and how do we make sure that we have the enablers in place to make sure that that model is successful. So that's just one example, but I think it's a reality.
Did it ever happen to you, Vanessa, where you were working change management and you really had people motivated and on board and engaged with the change that we proposed, but then you turned around and either the process weren't there or the tech wasn't there? And what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, of course that happens. I think in project world, and Alexis, you know this too, you get so focused on what you're trying to achieve within the budget, you're really sticking to a schedule. And that's why you need to bring the broader team together to bring attention to the considerations like the people, the process, the technology. There's certainly been changes, you know, where with clients and even ourselves. The COVID is an easy example because we've all lived it. Within, you know, 24 to 48 hours, everyone had to work from home. And I've heard of organizations that forever said it was an impossibility because of safety and, you know, data risks and that type of thing. And within 24 hours, everyone was set up at home. And I'm sure there are processes that took time to realize that those needed to change as well to support. Not only do you have the technology infrastructure and the hardware, but, you know, all your processes are now accessible electronically. Simple things like expenses, you know, everything, it has an impact, a domino effect that you need to consider. But it's salvageable, I'll say that. It's never too late to change.
Never too late to do good. All right, let's jump to our next myth. Here it is. Transformation, there's different ways to manage it from a project perspective. So lately, we've been hearing a lot about the agile methodology. And a lot of people are thinking that the best way to manage a transformation is agile and not waterfall. Now, like I said a bit earlier, I'm not a big fan of buzzwords, and I think people throw them around and we all expect everyone to understand. So I'd like to, before we really tackle the myth or reality, for Alexis to give us just maybe a brief explanation of what the agile and waterfall methodologies are all about.
Absolutely. So simply put, if I start with waterfall first, it is a sequential or linear process of project management. So typically you would see a linear process of discrete phases or packages of work. And more often than not, you're likely to see that in manufacturing or construction sort of environments. Again, these are suited to where it's well-defined requirements and scope. And if I use an example in terms of waterfall, if you think about building a house, you've got to start with the base or the concrete slab, then the frames will go up, and then the walls, windows, etc. You don't start with the roof because you've got nothing to put it on. So waterfall in that respect can be applied, or you might be likely to see it applied to traditional large-scale projects of that nature. Where it works well, again, is where you've got really clearly defined requirements. Where it may not work well because of that linear nature is if there are late revisions or changes. It can make you either restart or pause where you're at in terms of the progress of your project. Waterfall projects can be easier to measure progress because you can see how you're progressing through those phases, and in turn you can then check that against time and budget. Agile methodologies, however, break down the developmental process into much more iterative steps. In that nature, it encourages flexibility, testing, prototyping. There is a higher level of frequent feedback and sort of collaborative decision making. And you might see, for example, a number of small teams completing sprints or packages of work. Positives about the agile approach, again, is that sort of collaboration, customer feedback loop. But on the flip side, it can be a little bit more tricky to clearly define the amount of effort required and the time, because those requirements might not be as clearly defined or established up front as you would expect from a waterfall approach.
Well, thank you for bringing us all up to speed on this, Alexis. Can you share with us the poll results? Let's see if we have 100% again, or if we have people divided on this.
We have a 75% saying that this is a myth and 25% saying that it's a reality.
All right, a bit of a debate. I like that. What's your view, Alexis? What do you think about this one?
For me and my experiences in managing projects, for me, it is a myth. And I say that because people, by their very nature, and we've already touched on it this morning already, people are different. We have different ways that we like to work together, how we collaborate or how we don't. And so trying to force a particular methodology or approach to a project just doesn't necessarily work. For me, it's got to be about what is the best fit for the project, what is the best fit for the client, what is the best fit for the team, and in turn making sure that the team and the project manager have the right skill sets for the methodology that is required. If I think about a large rail infrastructure project that I was working on, again, because it's in that construction setting, much more representative of a waterfall approach, structured, linear. You have to complete a certain design element before it is approved, budgeted, etc., and then move into the next level of design. You might see a number of gated approval pathways as part of that. But by its very nature, being an infrastructure designed for people, you might have, or you would hopefully see, an element of user-centered design, which is around really designing for the people that are interacting with that rail. So it could be as simple as traditionally it might have been viewed as signage and wayfinding, but how do people access the station? How do they know? How do they get onto the track? How do they buy a ticket? How does that work, and how do people move through that environment? In order to test and make sure a design meets the needs of those users over and above an engineering standard, for example, that by its very nature is highly iterative in order to get that feedback loop. However, where you get a conflict in those sorts of construction projects is that in order to get that level of detailed design to test in a more agile approach, a design will be so heavily progressed that it's difficult to retrofit changes and move backwards almost in that linear fashion. For me, in those sorts of projects, you need a really strong project manager to be able to bring all that together. You need a client that sees the value in this case, perhaps a slightly blended approach to get the best outcomes for the users and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So for me, best fit for project, best fit for client, best fit for outcomes, rather than a clearly, one view or the other for certain projects.
All right, I like the open-mindedness of tailoring it to the people and not just to what people say is the right thing to do. Vanessa, do you have a different view? Are you with a 25% on this one, or do you side with Alexis?
I side with Alexis, and I actually just want to touch on one thing you mentioned, Alexis, because I think there's lots of value in it. And you mentioned it also depends on the capabilities of the project team, and I think that's something that's sometimes overlooked because gosh, I'm even using Agile in my personal life. Like, it's just become this buzzword, and if you don't know Agile, like you don't know change management, you're obviously missing something, so it has to be everywhere. And I think it's important to recognize that you know, it is a methodology and it's a different set of skills and capabilities that you need from the project delivery team to do Agile really well. I think some projects misstep because there's an attempt to do Agile without acknowledging, you know, what best practice looks like and how to actually get value from it, having the right people around the table. So I just wanted to pick up on that because I think it's a really important point you made. The other thing I want to say is I've worked on projects that have used both of methodologies, and from a change perspective, I'll bring it back to change because that's what I do and what I love. It's a very different approach, and I think if anyone's a change manager listening in, you've probably had to make a shift as well, where initially change management was very much focused on, you know, your master plan and your roadmap and your communications plan, and everything was very much sequential and organized. In the Agile project that I worked on, and in a few of them, it's all around being, you know, what can I do from a change perspective at the right time to drive value? And you're constantly in this mindset and thinking through, okay, what needs to happen now based on what's happening in the project delivery, based on, you know, the sprint cycles. So it's much more about being flexible and being speedy over, you know, the planning and the predictability of what change traditionally looked like. And I think that's what makes it exciting. You're constantly reprioritizing, you're constantly engaged with the project team, and that's why being connected to someone like you, Alexis, is so valuable for us, because we can bring the voice of the people to the front, and you have visibility of the technical aspects and how those come together. We talked about the intersection points of, you know, people, process, technology. Oftentimes that happens through that relationship. And anyone that's on the line that may have worked on a project with me, I think you'd vouch that we had pretty close relationships. I found my way into the project team in some way or another. Well, that's what I'll say about that, Annie.
I'd add to that, you know, the title of this webinar was "A Change Manager is the Best Ally for a Project Manager," but I'd like to think that it's also the other way around, that we can really, the project manager is the person that really can help us perform our role in many ways, because they have a level of detail and understanding of what's happening, that when you talk about infrastructure and building new railways and thinking about the person buying the ticket, that's not my expertise. But knowing that the person I work with is across all of that 100% and knows what's happening and when, it really reassures me that I'll say the right things to the people to engage them, and getting those people, process, technology right to really get that transformation from A to where we want to go. Well, again, that's that relationship, I think, that can get us through those great transformations.
It's a win-win. It's a no-brainer in my mind.
Well, I was hoping we'd disagree a little bit on some things, but we'll see. Maybe in the next couple of minutes we can find some points of disagreements. And like Alexis said, maybe it's just, or was it you, Vanessa? Maybe we're not fools. We just went through the same experiences, and we know now for a fact that working together just works best. Okay, clicking through the next myth. Yes, all right. I love that image. I don't know about you, but I've seen it a few times on the web since COVID. The next myth is that for a transformation to be successful, it needs to be leader-led. So please, people, to your polls and get your votes in. I like that image because I think it speaks the truth a little bit. A lot of transformations happened through COVID, and now that's our current example, but in history, there's different examples that led to major transformations, I believe. So it's not always the CEO or the CFO or the chief technical officer that leads the transformation, but sometimes there's an external force that just creates it. That being said, one of the fundamental elements in change management is that leaders play a major role in organizational change and in transformation. The leaders need to be active, they need to be visible, and they need to establish the purpose for the change, for the transformation. But yeah, there might be other elements. So I'd like to close the poll now, and for Vanessa to give us a little bit of a view of the results, please.
I love that we've introduced these quick polls. Okay, so we have 11% of participants say this is a myth and 89% suggest this is a reality. So
Where do you
there's
stand?
an obvious majority. Oh, I think I stand here. I always have an answer before I actually even answer the question. I think it's a reality, and I say this. I think ideas can come from anywhere in the organization, and I think there is immense value when ideas do come from the bottom. But ultimately, they need to be owned, they need to come to life, and they need to be driven by someone at the top so they get the attention and the resources and the investment that they deserve. What's really cool about this is that frontline staff and employees across organizations at all levels are having more opportunities to speak up and voice their ideas, and innovation is becoming more and more prominent in everyday language, and creating channels where we allow innovation to flourish and to become ideas that can be actually implemented is something that's becoming more common practice. And organizations, particularly those that are higher performing, they have deliberately established processes and forums and policies, and it's really ingrained in the operations and the culture on how ideas can come from the bottom. So those that are on the front line arguably have some of the best ideas because they're dealing with customers day in and day out, and they know exactly what they need. That those ideas can make their way to the top relatively easy, and it's not something that's complex or bureaucratic. That there's a way for the ideas to be heard at the very top. Things like passion projects. Some organizations are allocating a day a week or time for passion projects, and from that comes great ideas. So I think ideas can come from anywhere. There's huge value in that, but ultimately they need to be owned and driven and brought to life by a leader.
What do you think, Alexis, about this one?
I agree. It's a reality for me. Part of me wishes we had a little bit more conflict, but perhaps there's opportunity to continue the conversation after this webinar with some of our polling participants who have some different answers. But for me, it's a reality, and it needs to be, transformation needs to be leader-led, regardless of the trigger. If it's an external factor, COVID is our example in this graphic, whether it is a people-powered passion project, bottom-up trigger or movement, as Vanessa has mentioned. But for me, you still need someone to take ownership of that change and really drive it forward. For me, I view leaders as being important for the long-term, sustained, strategic change. If I use COVID as an example, change has been forced on us by necessity, and as we've already discussed, that change was sort of immediate and in a 24-hour period. Whilst COVID has provided an opportunity in many ways for businesses to pivot, and for leaders and organisations to change their operating models, how they connect with their customers, the channels in which they use. Ultimately, a leader needs to be able to grasp those opportunities with both hands and make the change happen, and for the momentum to continue long after COVID, either we find our new normal or even beyond that. So I think leaders are crucial for that. In non-COVID example, even when I've worked in both the education sectors, but also healthcare as well, you may have change where the trigger is driven by wanting to achieve different outcomes for patients, or changing the educational delivery model. And that could come from researchers, that could come from subject matter experts. But as part of the triangle we were talking about before with people, process and technology, you need a leader to be able to bring all three of those components, regardless of the external factor, the driving force. You need a leader to actually take that and turn it into action.
I'm a big fan of team sports. Anyone who knows me knows that. And sorry, Vanessa, I know you've heard me talk about that way too often already, but this example brings team sports in my mind, because I see like the coach will come with the game plan, right? They'll know you'll do that defense, that offense is happening, and it all makes sense, and everyone works to it. But sometimes you'll have someone on the court say, well, they're doing things differently, and I know that because they're hitting me and they're taking the ball off my hands, or whatever sport it is that you play, if there's a ball or not. So when we have that right communication channel with the leaders, like the coach in that situation, you say, we need to change what we're doing because this is happening. But I don't think the player on the court is sufficient, or in most situations it's not sufficient, because you don't want to go against what the leader has said. So it's really important. Maybe it comes from the court or the field, or wherever is it that you perform your team sports, but you need to get the leaders buy-in to really make that change to the game plan. I won't bore you with some more sports metaphors.
Oh, Annie, I was going to say, I like your sport analogies. It's fine. Brings it to life.
I think they make so much sense.
As a former coach, I'm not an active coach at the moment, but as a former coach of water polo, there's two things that you need to be able to do. You need to be able to see the field, which if you're a player and you're in the mix of it, and in some cases you're underwater for half the game, the coach needs to be able to see what's happening across the whole field. But importantly, as part of being a leader, you need to be able to hear those lived experiences of the people on the field and the person that's, you know, holding your togs and kicking you in the guts and everything else. So you need to be able to do both. You need to have the vision, but you need to actually listen.
So true. And it's not even meant to be, but I think it leads us well into our next myth, which is the topic of today's conversation. The poll is up, so please people vote. Is it a myth or a reality that a change manager is a project manager's greatest ally? I said that it linked us well into the next myth because we talk about the relationship of the coach, of the people on the field, but I think that's where the project manager and the change manager are very often on the field. And when they work together to get to the coach, I don't know, to me it all just comes together and it makes sense. So let's close the poll and see what people think after nearly 45 minutes of talking about this. Alexis, can you tell us the polling results, please?
I can. So we have a unanimous 100% reality response for this.
Oh, thank goodness.
Like da da da.
Yes, that's us on there. Do you agree, Alexis? Do you think that we form a great team together?
Yeah, I do. Back to the beginning where I spoke about why I loved project management, and for me that is the team and bringing everyone together. And so a project manager and the change manager, the relationship that you need to have for the collective success of a project, of a change, you absolutely are a very valued greatest ally. For me, I would hate to think that the time, effort, investment of your time, energy and dedication in a project, I would hate to think that that would all fall over because you didn't have the change management piece on board. Vanessa, you did mention that sometimes change management can be viewed as being behind the scenes, because I guess with many things, if it's done really well, sometimes you don't notice it. You're more likely to notice when something goes wrong. If I bring my infrastructure experience, I almost liken it to structural engineering. You don't realize what's going on underneath the ground until something falls over. And that's where the structural engineering didn't quite go according to plan. It's not my favorite engineering discipline because they're all equal. But in this instance, absolutely, I think the change manager is your greatest ally.
I love the infrastructure engineering talk. We're more than just the fluffy, or what did you call it earlier, Vanessa? Anyway.
We're not fluffy.
We're not fluffy. What do you think about working with great project managers? And maybe you have a particular view on this one because you've acted in both roles in your life.
Yeah, I think it's a reality. I think we equally can benefit from each other in projects, and I think it's about bringing the people components with the technical aspects of the delivery. And often, you know, when change has a seat at the table, it's easier to just bring them in. And some of the most successful projects I've been on is where anytime there's you know, anyone in the project delivery team for that matter, including the project manager, thinks that this discussion has an impact on the people, the end users or the stakeholders, that we need to bring change in. Even if you're unsure, there is no harm in having change at the table. And then to decide whether or not this is actually within the remit of the change manager and the scope of the change management team. I think, you know, the best projects I've worked on, I've been close with the project manager, and it's often been in an informal relationship where the project manager recognizes the value that change can bring and when it's appropriate for them to be part of the conversations, and that's regularly and that's often. And the change manager acknowledges the role that the project manager plays and, you know, the objectives they're trying to deliver on and the strengths that we each bring to the table. I won't pretend it's all rosy in every single one of the projects I've been on as a change manager, that the project manager and I have been very close and we've had this great relationship and I've been in all the conversations that I needed to. I don't think that's reality. And if anyone's a change manager, you may feel that in certain projects, you're a bit on the outside and you're constantly trying to force yourself into the discussions. And Annie, I know you're a change specialist as well. So I want to throw a question at you before we wrap up. Has that happened to you where, you know, you just can't seem to get in the project team conversations and people seems to be an afterthought and it's a bit of a struggle? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I love that we can maybe end a little bit on a note where it's not like life's not perfect, and nor are projects and or transformations. And very often I've been in a situation, or not very often, but it's happened where you work in change management, like you said, you feel on the outskirts of the project. But to me, one of the challenges is that sometimes there's even almost a competition with the project manager, and I think that's one of the worst ingredients to a transformation. And it's also a worst ingredient for anything that happens in your life. Let's talk about team sports again. If you play with someone and you don't get along, it's not going to go well. And the best thing to do about this, I think, is to really go very relationship on this and talk it out. Try to just agree on what's your role, what's my role, where do we come together, and really massage that relationship, because I think nobody wins if that relationship stays negative, but everybody gains if the change and project managers are able to really work together. The stakeholders at the end will definitely gain from that, but the leaders as well. Imagine coming to a steering committee and you have your what is it, Superman and Robin on there? Yes, we're experts at superheroes. So you got Robin and Superman that don't agree. Who do you listen to? And so I think it's on us, the change and project managers, to make the efforts to bury the hatchet and get along. And I think we can all achieve that if we have the success of the project at heart.
Yep. No, you're so right, Annie. And in my experience, I've also aligned myself with someone on the project delivery team that wasn't the project manager. So there are ways for change to be at the table. You've just got to find the way that's right for that project, the culture, and the people you're working with. What an exciting conversation. I wish we could talk forever about this.
But time's coming to an end. It's almost 12 now, so we'll just wrap up here with our beautiful faces again in 2-3 dimensions. We've talked for the last hour. Thank you for listening to us. It was a pleasure to have a chat with you, Alexis and Vanessa. For everyone on the line, we'd love to connect. If you have questions or if you'd like to just grab a physical or virtual coffee with us, please reach out anytime. We hope that we were able to transmit a bit of the passion that we have for what we do, and that might inspire you in your transformations. If you're a leader, please make sure you get a great dynamic duo to transform your organizations. And if you're going through organizational change yourself, keep an eye open for those 2 people who really are trying to make your lives easier. They have your best interests at heart. Before we wrap up, anything to add, Alexis? A little final note?
Oh, just that I've really enjoyed being part of the conversation. I think whilst we've been in agreement on a lot of points, we're still perhaps coming at the points of view from slightly different experiences. So in that respect, it's really refreshing to be able to have a conversation about where things work and where they may not work, or the constraints that you have to work within, and where that tension can occur, but how you work through it. So I think with anything in life, but also in business as well, it comes down to relationships. So the better you can work together for a shared outcome and shared purpose, the smoother it will be, or the fact that you can just navigate any of those complexities or curveballs that get thrown your way.
Thanks, Alexis. Vanessa, do you have final wise words for us as well?
Not really. I think that's the perfect wrap, Alexis, on the session. And thanks, Annie, for hosting and all your sporting analogies. We know you're an exceptional handball player.
Sure. Retired, but still loving it. Thank you, ladies. Anyone on the line who'd love to hear more of our team's webinars? We've got 2 webinars left before Christmas. Can't believe it's Christmas already. So join us at the end of the month. Marianne, Vanessa, I don't know if you'll be there, but Marianne, Callie, and Janine will definitely talk to you about strategic or operational HR. What's the difference? And there are differences. And I don't know anyone else better than them to talk to you about that. So thank you everyone for your time. Hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.